Welcome to the House, Minister. Thank you for coming in on foot of a request I made last week to the Leader of the Seanad to have this important debate. And I would ask you to relay our concerns back to Minister Donnelly, as indeed I know you will. This has indeed been a very long saga. We've seen many years of obfuscation of Byzantine legal deliberations and much lack of clarity. Nobody through all this denies the need for a new maternity hospital, and I think we're all agreed it should be co-located with an adult acute service. So that is something we are agreed on. However, valid and serious concerns remain about the ownership and the clinical independence of the proposed new maternity hospital. And it does boil down to this, after, as I say, many years of discussion and debate, that without state ownership of the land, the site on which the new hospital is to be built, without state ownership, there will be valid and serious concerns remaining about clinical independence. And I do want to pay tribute to Dr. Peter Boylan, who has been making this point very clearly for some time now, and who I think his concerns are being very much borne out, and he has indeed been vindicated. And indeed, the government has accepted this, because we've seen the Taoiseach saying when the state is investing, the state should own. We've seen the all-party consensus emerging in the Dáil last week on in the motion on 23rd of June. And I think the key question that we must all ask now is, what has the government done since last week to move ahead on the motion to ensure that this hospital will be built on state-owned land? And, Minister, I should say, there's so many concerns about the structures that have been devised. And I think we do need to step back and remember that the discussion and the negotiations commenced well before our laws changed in 2018 to enable the provision of legal abortion in Ireland. As somebody who campaigned for many years, for decades indeed, to see repeal of the Eighth Amendment, I'm very glad that our laws have moved into the 21st century, that women can now access the reproductive health care we need in this state. But unfortunately, that moving forward of laws has not been reflected in the negotiations on the new maternity hospital, and in particular on the structures around what we might call this Catholic successor company into which ownership is going to pass, the St. Vincent's Holding Company. And I should say, I have spoken before about this. We know that we have a legacy issue in this state where 90% of our schools are state-run, state-maintained, the state pays teacher salaries and building maintenance. But the land on which the schools are built, on which they are sited, remains owned by religious orders or by church authorities, in large part by the Catholic Church. And I've called a syndrome that we've seen emerging in recent years a developer's wife syndrome, where we've seen the orders themselves divesting ownership into a company, what we might call a Catholic successor company, in the same way that a male developer will often divest assets to his spouse in order to free himself of asset ownership. The liabilities attached to him, he owns no assets. The partner or spouse has the asset ownership but has no liabilities. We've seen this used to very serious effect by religious bodies in the past, and I think in particular of the Christian Brothers divesting ownership of schools to the Edmund Rice Schools Trust, an ostensibly lay company but in fact a Catholic successor company. And I've been involved in a school divestment where we saw this happen and where we see endless difficulties with a lease arrangement in this context. And that's what I fear about the structure that the state is proposing. A 99 or even a 149-year lease is a short-term lease in the eyes of the Vatican and the eyes of the church authorities. The church takes a long view, and I'm quoting here from government people who've talked to me about this. I attended the Oireachtas briefing, Minister, with Minister Donnelly 2 weeks ago, where we were told that by officials that attempts had been made by the state to transfer the land into state ownership. And the question remains, asked just now by a government senator, why won't the St. Vincent's Holding Group simply gift the land to the state now? Why are they so anxious to retain ownership? We have multiple examples of other hospitals where we see different, St. James's Hospital, for example, where we see different owners of the land. There's no requirement that it be owned by the same entity. 5 separate entities on the site of St. James's. We must ask that question, Minister, and without a sufficient answer, we simply are lacking the necessary assurances about clinical independence and indeed indeed about protection of the state investment of €800 million. We no longer in a 21st century republic have to accept that religious entities continue to own land on which the state is investing large sums of money. We have moved on. I've sought FOI requests from the HSE and the Department of Health to see what attempts have been made to buy the land. We certainly don't need a constitutional amendment. We have a CPO procedure and that should be used. And finally, Minister, two specific questions. What has happened with the business case that the National Maternity Hospital apparently submitted to government but which was apparently rejected? We've seen different answers given on that. I would like clarity on that. And finally, we have no clarity as to whether abortions have been carried out at St Vincent's Hospital. And again, there's a serious concern that where we see a Catholic religious order divesting itself of healthcare holdings into a successor company, that this is not a secular successor company and that this will not, in fact, have the clinical independence that we require as women living in a 21st century republic. Seanad.